Welcome to another edition of Overcome Out Loud with Charlie Smith. This is a podcast dedicated to real people that have overcome real obstacles in their lives to give you hope and a pathway out. And today is, I guess to say it mildly, a very special episode. I am joined by none other than my own mother, Mary Lou Smith. Hello, Mother.
Hello, son.
How are you?
I'm excellent. I'm excited.
It's nice to have you. And my mom is a survivor of domestic violence. She is a member of a foundation called Finding Our Voices, which is located up in the Maine area. Her and Patricia McLean, who's also on the podcast, have created a foundation dedicated to giving sufferers of domestic violence their voice back. And we'll learn more about that. My mom, Mary Lou, as I like to call her, Mama Liucci, is on today to talk about her survival of domestic violence and the courage that she found several years ago to leave a domestic violent relationship. And really, I think, is here to inspire, empower others who may not be aware of the trappings of domestic violence, what it looks like, what it feels like, and the things that she learned about it and overcame. So, Mom, thanks for the courage, really, of sharing your story today. So let's talk about where it all began for you. I know you're coming to us from your beautiful condo there in Scarborough, Maine, but you weren't born there. Tell us a little bit about where and how you grew up.
Well, my mom was an immigrant from Sicily. And so I'm first generation Italian. And so I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and in a six-family block where all the relatives were there. My uncles were on the third floor. We were on the first floor. My grandparents, Nunzio and Litrio, were on the second floor. And so it was very, close group of, I call it, instead of the Kennedy compound, I call it the Rizzo compound. And my mom was my mom had to play the role of being able to speak English and answer all the demands of her father, who died owning two six-family apartments, but could only write X. And so, and my grandmother used to, my mother said her mother said, "You love your children when they're asleep." So in other words, there was no outward sign of affection. It was just do your job, do it well, and you don't have a choice. You just have to do it. And so I was born into the family with my mom and dad, Dad Anthony or Tony. And so my mother was a very strong-willed, dominant woman. My father was loving and passionate and really taught me how to love unconditionally. My mom was just her way or the highway. And so even as a young child, when I tried to speak my independence, I know one time my cousin Loretta used to get away with murder. And so when my mom said, "Come in for lunch," I said no. And because my cousin Loretta could say it, and my mother didn't say a word. And so my mom pulled me by the hair, dragged me into my bedroom, said, "Oh, no lunch." So that's just a small example of some of the my mom's how do I want to say it? She loved me, I'm sure, but she didn't know how to show it, and I got that love from my dad.
Oh, that's such an interesting way to put it. Yeah, so you had, kind of two dynamics there. I mean, you had this, the incredible closeness of that kind of, I think what everybody thinks about when they think about the Italian families growing up together, stacked one on top of each other in these apartments, and the Sunday dinners and all of the things that go along with it, bracketed by this inability to kind of speak and have your own voice, and that your mom, my grandmother Santa Liucci, demonstrated her love in more of a restrictive and confining way that you became accustomed to. And so as you developed as a young woman and started to find your way into the world of picking somebody to spend time with, had you found yourself with men that had demonstrated any kind of authoritative, controlling means before you ended up meeting your husband, my dad?
Absolutely not. And the background is I was born into the Catholic Church, And then I was educated grammar school, high school, and college to all girls. And so my experience with, I dated, but I didn't ever have a serious relationship till I met my ex-husband. And so, but the other thing is, I was nurturing, I was compassionate, I was trusting, and I didn't even suspect that anyone could be abusive and treat me the way it happened as a future with my ex.
Yeah, I mean, you really had, I mean, people talk about love language. I mean, you had a dad who really loved you unconditionally. I know
Mhm.
you were super, super close with your dad and really found unconditional love through him. And so, what he modeled wasn't in any way consistent with, domestic violence. But I think one of the things that I've learned, and I think you'll speak to, is how subtle domestic violence is. How it's not like there's always these warning signs. I talk sometimes with people in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and you have these various stories where some people have this progressive, much like myself. I started drinking at the age of 12, but the disease and the addiction part of it really didn't dig in and take hold until much later in life. And then you have others, and I've interviewed several of them who, from their first hit, from their first drink, from their first drug, they were addicted, and and there was no turning back. And for you, this domestic violence issue kind of snuck up on you. I mean, you didn't see that going into the relationship, and you felt
No,
all
when we started dating, and I met her in September and got married in the following August, there were red flags, but I didn't see them as red flags. I
right.
mean, one thing that was really, I had a part-time job for the city, watching kids at a gym, and he came to pick me up for a date, and I was taking an aspirin. Okay, so an aspirin. I didn't need, and he came up to me and he got angry and he said, that causes cancer. His mother said, anytime you take aspirin, you're just feeding cancer. From that moment until probably 25 years later, I never took medicine in front of him because I was afraid of that's how timid and afraid I was. Or picking out china for all my friends that were engaged or whatever. You go to the nice china shop, and of course I picked out one I really loved, and he said, "Oh, I can't get that." He said it's going to have there's grooves in it, and we're going to have eggs in it, stuck in there. And it's just like you don't think twice about them, but they are red flags.
Yeah, the when
Control.
the red flags are truly red. But I think that's one of the greatest things about Overcome Out Loud, and the courage that people like yourself and others that have overcome, whether it's substance abuse or eating disorders or a medical diagnosis, that we're able to learn through the courage and vulnerability of people that have experienced these things. Because I think, having heard some of the people that have experienced your talks, they see those, they have those same red flags, but they don't identify them, and you're able to shine a light on the red that is that flag. And so having seen those things and not understanding what they were, how did domestic violence kind of evolve for you, and what was the progression? Because the other thing that I notice is you started to lose, I think, a bit of your sense of family, like your Italian heritage, became a curse, and something that you couldn't really enjoy as much as you did growing up. And that even, my dad, your ex-husband, was even dismissive of how you grew up.
Yeah, I think like where you began about my Italian heritage, and then about my best friend that I had been friends from since high school. She came and stayed with us after we got married. Said I don't want her around. She's too assertive or whatever. And so then I lost contact with her. Um, and then slowly and gradually, each time one of those incidents happened, I would just say, "Oh, I'll disagree with him," because I lived a life of peace at any cost and walking on eggshells. And each time I that happened to me, a little bit of me disappeared, a little bit, until finally, on August 20th, 2005, there was nothing left of me. I had gone for 43 years trying to fix something that was unfixable. And and in the end, at that point, I really wanted. Am I going too much to the future?
No, I mean, I think it's important to denote how long that you were in the dark, and how long you were
Oh,
in, how
oh,
long
that
you
was
were
the
in,
point.
how long
Yeah.
you were in, how long you were in denial. We don't know what we don't know. How long that sometimes it's funny when we talk about substance abuse or alcoholism. We'll talk to people in recovery, and even for myself, that your alcoholic life seems the only normal one. You've gotten so used to this cycle of numbing the pain of your life through substances that it becomes the only normal one. And to sit here with somebody who was in a relationship from early flags in dating, but then having 4 children and a 43-year marriage, that this was a long run of denial for you.
Yeah, and Charlie, I think and it's not just me, but a number of women that we talk to, I never thought I was suffering from domestic violence. I was always taught that if I prayed hard enough and if I worked hard enough, I could change. I could I could change the situation. But I think I learned that it's good to pray and it's good to ask for things, but in the end, it has to be you that opens the door and leave. No one's going to open the door and say you're suffering domestic violence. You have to leave. So at that point, I was 65 years old. I'm suffering from domestic violence and also post-traumatic stress disorder. That I was ready to end my life in order to get rid of the pain. And so I praise God that I chose not to take my life that day.
Yeah, and how if you could just share a little bit about how the control progressed. I mean, you talked a little bit about those early warning signs, but those early warning signs, those red flags got bright red, and there were a lot more of them. And I think you talked eloquently about, just peace at any cost, and denying the reality of what was happening around you as you look back now through your new pair of glasses at that life. What were the kind of the progressions of domestic violence for you that you would really alert other sufferers to?
Manipulation. And I just felt like raising my children, I couldn't raise them the way I wanted to. It had to be this his way or the highway. He was demanding of how I have a full pages of all of absolutes that we lived with in order not to have him explode. And none of them to try to prevent any of them was impossible because there was no warning sign. Anything could, a fork put the wrong way, or a kid coming late for dinner, or just any minor thing could cause an explosion, as you well know, Charlie.
Yeah, and let's talk about the trauma part of it. You said you suffered from post traumatic stress. I mean, trauma, are these effects, and people think of trauma in different ways, but there you are, a mother, you've got 4 kids. You talk about raising your 4 kids and not being able to raise them the way you wanted to. How did as we dig into this, I mean, we're gonna get into that part of just as a mother not being able to protect your kids from what ended up to be not just control and manipulation, but the violent part of domestic violence,
Hmm.
really took hold in our house. I mean, this was not just, picking out the wrong dishes and being angry about aspirin. Ultimately, this progressed into, violent and physical abuse at the hands of an overpowering man in your own home. And, that must have been, as a mother, having that, desire to protect your cubs, and then seeing this happening, you must have felt a bit powerless.
It was Charlie. And I think it's a really important message I'd like to give today to anyone that's watching and listening. I was the person in that family that was there to protect my children. And yes, I was in a bad situation. And yes, things were, I couldn't control. I didn't realize I could control. I didn't realize I could walk out the door. I realized, I just hoped that tomorrow would be better. And so it was a very difficult session I had with my therapist about saying, yes, it was difficult. Yes, it was hard, but I made some poor choices, and I didn't take responsibility for my children at that point. And and I think just explaining that to my children that I know I could have done things different. At that point I was in fear, power control, and ultimate denial. But at least I still admit that there was a part of me that could have done something and didn't, and I wanted my kids to know that I didn't take that lightly, that I didn't brush it off, that I, I will. Sorry, that's important. I think it's something that's important in our relationship, Charlie. You felt when I took that responsibility, it made a difference in our relationship.
Yeah, I think as children growing up with a parent who's a victim of domestic violence, there's the child's view of it, and as a child, I think what we all need is validation, and we all need to be accepted. And there was this narrative that either nothing was wrong, it wasn't bad as you thought it was, or somehow I did the best I could, and well, there's an element of truth to all of that, but at the end of the day, um,
Mhm.
you were responsible to protect your kids and you didn't, and that's just a fact that you've acknowledged and admitted. And I think it, as hard as it is to have that conversation as a child of domestic violence and violent abuse, at least it validates what happened to you. At least you can heal from that. It's like, the lie just, the lie and the dismissal and the minimization of it just makes the pain even harder, because now you're trying to rationalize, well, so, I know this wasn't happening to my friends, and I'm sure for you,
Mhm.
trying to make your family seem as normal as you could, was important. And, maybe if you could talk a little bit about that external appearance, that facade that you had to keep up. I know, for a lot of people that either the concern about what other people think or that need to create an image keeps people trapped. And I know it kept you trapped, and kept
Mhm.
all of us trapped in this kind of prison of, what happens in this house stays in this house. I've learned, the primary rules of a dysfunctional family are don't ask, don't talk, don't tell, don't feel. And we sure live by all of those. But you felt a certain obligation to have an appearance. I mean, I can remember keeping the house a certain way, and when guests would come over, or company would come over, as we called it back then, that there was that whatever was happening in our house, you had to put a certain paintbrush on. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's very accurate. And you know what's even more accurate? I had a former colleague come today to pick up some things I wanted to share with her, and we had coffee and we were talking. She was a graduate student at the university, and she said, "You probably don't remember, but at the end of the class, Charlie invited us all to your home for a celebration." And she said, "I remember observing you bringing out the appetizers, serving the guests." And she said, and just I saw in the corner of my eye the way he talked to you and like demanding you, why haven't you done this? And she said, "Is that woman a slave or his wife?" Now this is today that I just heard that,
Wow.
and and that was it was like Jack, black and white, how we could no one knew. That was no one knew the hell on earth that we were living, and we could change it on a dime. Um, that I remember we used to have these couples that came, and we'd had a big fight before they came, and they're pulling in the driveway, and then he'd say to me, "Do you love me?" And I'd say, "Oh yes, I love you." And he said, "Are you done with your ship?" And I'd say, "I'm done with your ship." Yeah. And then he said, "I don't have to be nice. These are your flanking friends." Okay, they get out of the car and whammo, it smiles. "Hi, how are you?" That's a small example of what your life and the life of our brothers and sisters and me were. And someone said that they were more on guard when they had company. Well, I kind of relaxed. It's like we knew we were safe and that he wasn't going to make any do anything rude or whatever in front of people. But yet, here I just heard today that someone saw him the way he talked to me and demanded stuff of me. So, um, and another example would be we had a gravel driveway, and as soon as we hear his car drive in, the kids would all scatter. And but just that no one knew. Everyone was shocked. Like we were this perfect Catholic family. Go to mass every Sunday, and the kids all in the row and all. But it was hell on earth, and I now live in a peaceful heaven on earth.
Yeah, well, it's important. So I think there's a principle of honesty that runs a
Hmm.
thread through most people's lives. And I think when people talk about the importance of that principle, it's learned, and we all have a desire to be honest, but you taught a lesson of deceit, and you taught a lesson, and it was for survival. I mean, we have these coping skills, but I think what's lost on people is how ingrained these survival skills become, and you can't just turn them off. I mean, I've at least for me, the dishonesty that I learned about what was happening at home bled into all other aspects of my life, where I learned to lie about who I was, and actually couldn't get to know myself. I mean, you'd been living a pretty powerful lie for almost 43 years. I mean, and I know everybody that's come on this podcast that has overcome anything in their lives to a person has all emphasized the importance of asking for help, and that you're not alone. I think it's so amazing that you and Patricia McLean now have started finding our voices, to where you're actually taking your mess, as you would say, and turned it into your miracle, and showing how what you went through is able to help other people. But can you maybe shed a light a little bit on the importance of people being true to themselves, and how they can how they can find themselves in the midst of this chaos? Because I mean, you literally create this facade. You're like an actress. You're putting on a show, and it's not representative of reality, but you become pretty much an Academy Award winning actress in presenting and displaying
And I was thinking
deception.
of what you were saying, just to discuss. In fact, uh, when I came to California for 2 weeks at Charlie's house, I ended up staying a year. And one of my friends said, when the Academy Awards came out, they said, "How come you weren't there?" I said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Well, you should have gotten the Academy Award for how you were able to disguise what was happening." But Charlie, that's the key to the whole thing. And living in denial, I didn't have to admit to anything. But once I came to the point where I just put a little crack into denial, and when I finally left and I was with a therapist, I made the decision. I never was honest with the therapist. I just, as soon as it got tough and they were telling me to do something that might be disruptive to my normal life, I would flee. And that was the first thing I did, to commit to myself, to be honest, to step out of that triangle of being a victim and a rescuer. I stepped out of that triangle and said, "No, Mary Lou, we're going to live in the truth. We're going to face the truth, and we're going to let other people know the truth too." And so I think that's part of the reason why it's my passion. My passion is to help one person I may never know, even abusive relationship. But the foundation of it is when you get to go for help, that you face it with honesty.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear your answer to that. That's what a great summation of where this lives. And I like to, and oftentimes we'll talk to people that are recovering from substance abuse, and we talk about not really being able to look in the mirror. We're really inside. We might have the external trappings of success, and as you described, the family having these trappings of a nice house and a few cars and a college professor as a husband, and cover a Catholic Digest magazine. But I'm wondering, could you pass the look in the mirror test at night? Could you look at Mary Lou Smith in the mirror, knowing that your husband had put hands on your own children, and that they were cowering in their rooms?
Powerful question, Charlie. And living in denial doesn't make you look in the mirror,
Ah,
because tomorrow is going to be different. This was just one incident. It's never going to happen. No, Charlie, I lived in total denial, so that I'm not sure I could have honestly looked at my face. I I just thought, what I always thought it was me, that I was doing something wrong, and what could I do differently to make things better? And when you're living with a narcissist personality disorder person, there's no fixing it. But that's why I looked in the mirror and said to myself, "Mary Lou, what can you do differently tomorrow to make this not happen again?"
wow. So you took on a lot of responsibility for someone else's behavior, and that's kind of
Yes, I did.
and that's a trap that we can hope nobody falls into, because everybody's responsible for their own shortcomings, and you've made a living amends, to your family and specifically to me by doing that. But I want to get into, because I think it's important, this kind of crossroads, because for 43 years, you raised a family, your kids were suffering at the hands of your husband, you survived, your children are now, all gone and out of the house, and you're there alone. Um, but the pain was still growing and the pain was still unbearable. What was your catalyst to finally, because you weren't a young lady at this point, and made a decision to end your own life in a way to escape this, and then ultimately that led you to actually leaving the relationship. And we hope by you coming on Overcome Out Loud that we can avoid people having to get to this tragic point. But can you walk us through a little bit about what it was like to be in that pain at the end, and the choice you made at first, to end your own life as a way out, but then actually to save your own life by walking out? I think that's an important crossroads to hear about.
And I've got, so my eyes are watering. Okay, so we're talking about Saturday, August 20th, 2005. And he's screaming and hollering at me all day, and it was just about, going somewhere where someone wasn't coming to Maine first, and who the heck did they think? And he was on and on and on. I got on my knees that day and begged him to please stop. I wanted to, and it was just swearing and abuse and whatever. And then I said, I can't take it anymore. I went into the bathroom. I had some painkillers. I had them in my hand, and I looked at him and I said, as sad and depressed and as lonely as I feel, I don't want to die. So I flushed him down the toilet. And then in my last hope that he would understand, I explained to him what I had done. He left the room and he came back with a gun. And I can still hear those cylinders spinning. And he said, Mary Lou, he said, I'll show you how to put a gun to your head and be successful committing suicide. And now this is the crazy part. And if you haven't experienced domestic violence, it's hard to comprehend that an intelligent human being didn't do something about it. So finally put the gun down. I went to call my therapist, and I didn't know how to do her paging. I didn't get it right. So that it just all ended. And we had a knack of, when things happened, we could switch it off. And so he said, "You gonna go to the movies?" And so I actually went to the movies with him that day, and the March of the Penguins, and the theater was so full. That was the first hint of things changing, and that we had to sit in separate seats. And so we did that, and then he actually went to 5 o'clock mass. And then that day, I mean, it's just like, Mary Lou, really? But I was still in my abnormal life. So the next day I was at my computer, and he walked by and he had a suitcase, and he said, I'm leaving you and you'll never see me again. Well, I heard that quite a few times. And I went into my sunroom, and his words rang with me. I'm leaving you and I'll never see you again. And I said, no, Mary Lou, enough. And I said, Charlie, I'm leaving you, in quotes, and you'll never see me again. And I was crying. I mean, I just packed a little carry-on suitcase. I called my daughter and asked if I could go to her house. And she said, Mom, of course you can. But, she didn't take it too seriously, because I had never really left. But I always, I'd go back or whatever. And she said, of course, Mom, you're welcome here. And you can stay as long as you need. And I packed my bag. And this is the part that I think, in my mind, shows the finality of it. I drove my car out of the garage, and the garage door slowly closed. And I remember looking there, crying, not knowing what was going to happen, and saying, I'm never, I might have gone back later to get things, but physically and mentally, I was never going to go in that house again. It was pretty amazing. I was 65 years old. And I really didn't care about my age. I didn't care what I had skills to teach, but I didn't care what I had to do, and who knew I was done, and I left that day, and I haven't
Wow.
looked back since.
Wow. What would you, that's incredible. I mean, especially at 65 with, I think, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the narrative we tell ourselves when faced with that decision. Cause I know, or I would imagine, I guess I'll say, maybe it's a better question than for me to imagine, were there times in the 43 years preceding that when you had tried to muster up the courage, when there had been some incident? Because I know, one of the things that I try to explain to people is we do things in pattern because we get payoffs from them. And, when you have this narrative of peace at any cost, or that there's something I can do to control this, then there's no real ingrained reason to leave, because you always believe there's something you can do. You've gotten into this habit of patching things over and
Hmm.
and writing the next act of the play, in hopes that it'll be better. And I can, there were several instances that I remember, whether it was him, trying to run me over in the station wagon before a freshman orientation in college, or putting a 45 caliber pistol to my head. I mean, those were incidents that occurred in my life, and I think people will be surprised to know that you went right back. Kind of like you were saying, you went to the movies. You went back to take care of him. You had lived in this pattern of, kind of, you know, putting the frosting
Hmm.
on top of this rotten cake for so long. Were there times before this that you had thought I should leave, or was this the first time that you really had? I mean, obviously you had the
I think
conviction
it
this
was the
time.
first. Yeah, I mean, I might have thought about it. I sometimes wishing he was dead,
Uh,
but and then that incident with the gun to your head on that Christmas night. Charlie left and went right back to college, but I was here with my mother, who had Alzheimer's, and three of my children, and I didn't know where to turn. And I should have called the sheriff. Instead, I called the family doctor, who was part of the old boys club. And this is how ridiculous this was. I called him and he said, Mary Lou, and we were at Sevago Lake on a dirt road, 6/10 of a mile on a dirt road. He said, why don't you take your mother and the kids back, and then drive back? Now it's icy and snowy and sleety, and the road is sheer ice, and come back and be with Charlie. Now that was the advice from the family doctor. And and you know, I took it. I brought my mom back, and I went back into that dark house. There were 6 houses on the road, but everyone was gone because they were gone for the winter. Charlie, that just shows how my brain worked, how I didn't see even the danger I was going to be into that house with him with a gun, and I still went back in there because didn't want to ruin his bad name, his good name. Pardon me. That was a Freudian flip. Yeah, it was a pattern. It was his power and control, and there was nothing in me to fight him. I didn't think I had anything in me to fight him. Today it's different.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that, because it does show the pattern of our minds. And, it's interesting because you were younger and probably stronger the night of that incident than you were when you actually left him, having, been a few years older, and
Hmm.
having a lot less, kind of vested there. But you still had the courage to change the way you thought, and change what you did. And let's, maybe, for the benefit of anybody who's listening or wants to share this with somebody who they see trapped in a domestic violent relationship, controlling, manipulative, where they're losing themselves. And maybe, if you could share a couple of, the bright red warning signs, and then, the things that you and Finding Our Voices and the other advocacy groups share about the importance of leaving. But let's start with what those warning, that, this, and I think you've done a great job, Mom, of outlining, the manipulation, the control, the losing of yourself. I think one of the most important things, when you feel like, you're the essence of who you really are as a woman or a man, whichever the case may be, is being eroded at the hands and control of another person. What other warning signs can you share with people?
Isolation. If
Uh,
they keep you isolated from your friends. I would talk to my children on the phone, and he would just want to listen to the conversation, or he would also tell them when the kids would call that your mother's not home or your mother's sleeping. So if you feel like you're being isolated, and and also the fact that um, they want to know where you are, what you're doing, and when you're coming back, and this was another thing, managing money, being in charge of money. I mean, my ex would spend $500 if we had $1 bill, and I would go shopping and spend 20 bucks, and we can't afford that shit. And so, yeah, just manipulating your money. And I was working. I mean, I was bringing in an income. And again, I lost myself in that. So isolation, financial control, you know, controlling who you can speak with and on the phone, are just a few things I can think of, Charlie.
Wow. Well, how courageous, and I'm just amazed at what you're doing today. And if you could talk a little bit about the overcome part of this now, where
Mhm.
you kind of put the fear aside, and I mean, I think people will say everything good in life happens on the other side of fear, and you've been facing these fears, for so many years, and finally, decided to walk through and face those fears and watch that garage door come down. Can you maybe help the people listening with that decision and the kinds of things that empowered you to leave, and how you and Patricia and the other advocacy groups that you work with are encouraging and supporting women in domestic violent relationships to not wait so long and to become empowered to overcome their situation and change?
I can only speak for myself, okay? And what happened to me once I left, I started getting the help I needed. Then I had to make a choice. Am I going to sit around and feel sorry for myself, or am I going to create a new life? And so I remember in California, I had my little notebook, and I write goals, that I set goals for myself of what I needed and what I wanted to accomplish, and then go out and reach for them. And in California, I volunteered at the children's school. I went to senior college, as well as doing therapy. And then I went and give to others. I think that I started volunteering. Am I answering your question, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean that's incredible. I mean, I think all of those things are empowering choices. I mean, I think
I
we are
travel.
we
Yeah.
are we are goal seeking mechanisms, and our mind likes a place to go. And if you don't know where you're going, you could end up somewhere else. And I think all of those things were helpful. And I think one of the things that I think people will be much more interested in than anything is the courage part.
Hmm.
When you sit there with that decision and you decide that you're not going to take it any longer, can you maybe help people, find the support they need internally, the courage they need internally? And I think one of the things I'd like you to really talk about is, as bad as you thought it was going to be, it wasn't that bad to leave. In fact, it was actually a path to freedom.
Hmm.
But it seems insurmountable. I mean, I could imagine at 65 with no idea of how finances are going to shake out or where you're going to live or what you're going to do. There was a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty.
Hmm.
Um, but you faced it, and it wasn't nearly as bad as you thought it was. In fact, it was really, as I said, a path to freedom. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, because you know what I realized?
What's that?
I had I who I am was always there. The courage and the resilience, but I locked it deep deep inside of me, and so I had to kind of, it was like a resurrection or a metamorphosis, to take the time. And I was in therapy, and I worked hard there too, but then I didn't just keep it in therapy. I brought it to my daily life, to do the things I wanted to do, and to have the courage to do them. I mean, simple things like learning to play canasta, or going to a writer's group, or I saved my pennies and I got myself, a friend wanted to join me, and I was able to take a tour, got myself from Portland, Maine to Palermo, Italy, and I did a tour of Sicily. Um, so it was just having and I said to people, don't ask me to do something because I'm going to say yes. But then also there was a part two. My first year, I didn't I worked at getting myself better, but I didn't do anything rash or impulsive, or I took time. I sort of said it was my time in the desert, my time to really assess who I was, where I wanted to go, who I wanted to be with. You know, that's the other thing. You leave and you lose people when you leave, when you get divorced. It's a way, you know, people choosing, you know, your ex or you, or just not wanting to listen or hear. Um, you know, my husband's family, which I thought was my family, and I lost that. But you know, I just kind of had to. I went through the sadness, but then I went to the acceptance that it's their loss, and I need to move on. But I had my year in the desert before I really reached out and made some choices. But I I've enjoyed the challenge, and I keep. You know what? I'm 81 years old. Pardon me, 81 and a half. And I still like even doing. I've never done a podcast before, so I said, "Charlie, sure." So I think that's it. To be open to what comes to you, and don't make a judgment of it right away. Give it a try. And I did try things, and it didn't work out. I stopped doing it, and then when it did work out, I continued. So um, it takes courage to leave, but it takes courage to keep moving on and rediscover who the person really is inside you, because the person's there. You just have lost it for a while.
Yeah, I think wow, that's amazing. I think I think everybody can take a page out of that playbook, Mama Liucci. I mean, that's that is I think people just don't understand or haven't really looked into the resiliency that they really do have,
Mhm.
and you've done that, and you've proven it over and over again in this new life, and at 81 and now an advocate for domestic violence and a member of Finding Our Voices, and all of the things you're doing to really embrace who you are speaks so loudly. There's a saying by Ralph Waldo Emerson that I really love, which is, who you are speaks so loudly I can't hear a word you're saying.
I'm
And
honored to be here today, Charlie, and it's a privilege to be here with you. And I think that should be others to see that example. With Charlie's hard work and my hard work, we can speak together and tell our story, and to give you hope that there is help out there, and that you're not alone. And I love you, Charlie.
oh, well, I love you too, Mom. Well, we knew this was going to be fun, and we knew that this was going to go deep, and really, it's been beyond a privilege and a pleasure to hear your overcome story, and to watch your growth, and to have your support and encouragement. And for anybody listening, just know that you too can overcome where whatever hole you're in, and that there's help out there. And if my mom can do it at her age, that anybody can do it. And just really appreciate, Mom, you sharing so openly and
Mhm.
vulnerably with us today. And just I got a lot of love for you. Thanks for coming on.